that, what you're going to hear today. I'll say that before I introduce Sandy Martin, Past President Martin up here, I'll say a very interesting correlation to the Nature Conservancy and our club, not only the Great Smoky Mountains piece, which we all know, but I believe you all date back to 1950, and that is the year in which we were also founded. So, two very old programs. It's my honor to introduce up to the podium Sandy Martin to provide an introduction to our speakers.
It's my pleasure to introduce my speakers today. The Nature Conservancy is a science-based organization. They're worldwide. They advance conservation in more than 80 countries and territories. They're making positive changes for our planet. Their mission is conserving the lands and the water that we all depend on for life. I always feel like they're kind of a quiet organization. I feel like so many people don't know about them, and they impact our world. So we're going to try to change that and get their name out there more. Laurel Creech is the state director for the state of Tennessee. I serve on her board. She's served on numerous boards of conservation-minded organizations, and she has a background in government. She grew up in Chattanooga, and she is a distance runner, a cyclist, and a triathlete. Catherine Medlock is Appalachian Conservation over 20 years, doing most of her work in the state of Tennessee. So let's give them a warm welcome.
Well, good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to be here with you all, and a huge thank you, Sandy, for that lovely introduction. We're so fortunate to have Sandy serve on our Board of Trustees for the Tennessee chapter of the Nature Conservancy. And thank you to all of you for inviting me to be here and Catherine to be here to talk about the Nature Conservancy with you all. I think this might be your first or second 2025 lunch. So the first, okay, it's a great way to kick off a new year. So as Sandy mentioned, I grew up in Chattanooga and grew up my entire childhood life there and moved to Nashville out of college. And so Tennessee has been my home my entire life. And one of the reasons I think I've stayed in Tennessee is because of the beauty that our beautiful and lush mountains, the streams, the lakes, the creeks, the rivers, and the people. So today I'm going to talk about the Nature Conservancy here in Tennessee in a global level, and then Catherine Medlock's going to join and talk about the work in the Appalachians, which you all are so familiar with because you're right on the cusp of the Appalachian Mountains. So as mentioned, Sandy had already talked about the mission that we have at the Nature Conservancy, and I'll just reinforce that. So the mission of the organization is to conserve the lands and waters in which all life depends. And that is a big, tall order. It is what feeds our planet. It's what feeds us as human beings, and it's what feeds all the different creatures that are out and about that help keep our environment at a healthy place and allow you all to get outside and enjoy nature and the outdoors with fresh air and fresh water and wildlife too. So this is the mission of the Nature Conservancy. And some of the things that we are focused on, we continue to meet the most urgent needs of our planet. And as Sandy had mentioned, we are a global organization, and we are facing at a global level the issues that we're dealing with climate issues, with climate mitigation efforts, and the species declining, the biodiversity of our species declining across the globe, which together can cause, and is causing, some real concerns for nature and for humans as well. So those are the broad values and mission that we do for the Nature Conservancy. And so how do we do that? We do conservation work, and we measure that impact, and we have teams of conservation staff including Catherine, all across the globe. And we have here in Tennessee, we have about 25 staff, which I'll talk about in just a second, and almost 2/3 of that is around conservation. So as the work that we do, is focused, I had mentioned about science-based organizations, Sandy had mentioned that too. So we are the largest science-based organization in the world. And in fact, if you take conservation organizations and other organizations together with all their scientists, it doesn't add up to the number of scientists that the Nature Conservancy has. So we are science-driven. Everything we do is about the science. And so we develop these goals as it relates to those two interconnected crises I mentioned about biodiversity loss and climate change. And we have our 2030 goals that we are working towards, which includes reducing our emissions, working with our communities and humans, conserving 10% of our oceans, conserving 650 million hectares of land, and supporting 45 million local stewards, and much, much more. So that is an overview of our work that we're doing, also doing significant work with freshwater as well, especially here in Tennessee. So as you can see, our team here in Tennessee, as I mentioned, is about 25 team members, and we're about to celebrate our 50th anniversary. We were founded, the Tennessee chapter was founded in 1978. So there is a chapter in every state of the United States, and the Tennessee chapter is one of the older versions of the Nature Conservancy. And a lot of the work we do is land protection. We have protected over 450,000 acres of lands all across the state. Many of them you may know of, such as down in Savage Gulf or up in the North Carolinas, there's portions of the South Fork, and definitely significant portions of the Appalachians region as well, and also out in West Tennessee, like Reelfoot Lake. So many of the state parks that you may have heard or hopefully recreate at, that land was ceded because we at the Nature Conservancy protected that land and then turned it over to the state to then to own and manage and to have it open for you all to enjoy as outdoor recreationalists. So land protection remains one of our biggest and most significant focus areas, but in addition to that, we have many other areas around conservation, which I'll touch on in just a second. So as I mentioned, here in Tennessee, we do have significant areas of focus. Those little dots that you can see are those areas that we have land protection and or conservation work that is happening across the state. So pretty significant. And I believe we can share this presentation with you so you can zoom in and see if the areas that you like to visit, we have a footprint in, and I would say probably yes. With us being around for almost 50 years and being such an established science-based organization, we've had significant impact in land conservation and land protection across the state of Tennessee. So the three main focus areas that we work on are two buckets: land, water, and climate. Working in those three areas will help those two crises I mentioned. Again, endangered species with biodiversity and climate change. So around land, I had mentioned about land protection. And again, a significant amount of land protection that we do. And typically in the land protection area, it's critical habitats, which we're going to talk about in the Appalachians in just a second. And it's usually contiguous lands that can continue to broaden the preservation and conservation of those areas and allow for the natural habitat to be revitalized and also offer acreage for visitors to enjoy and recreate as well. So we do significant, as I mentioned, we partner with state parks and national parks. We partner with the Corps of Engineers. We partner with also State Forest and National Wildlife Service, et cetera. Many different agencies that help us with the land protection and then ongoing manage that land. And in terms of land protection and land conservation, we do a lot of land management as it relates to bringing back that biodiversity in our forest. And Kathy is going to talk a little bit more about that. What she does and manages in Appalachians is similar to the work that we do across the state of Tennessee in many of our preserves and the forests that we partner with to manage. The other area is water. Tennessee, as you know, is so blessed to have so much amazing lakes and waters and streams and creeks. And over the years, due to development, some unhealthy development practices and chartered creeks and streams and rivers that happen out in West Tennessee, there's been some issues with the biodiversity and the connectivity of those freshwater systems. And so we work really hard in partnering up to remove some of those barriers, such as low-head dams, culverts, and things like that, so that the fish don't have to jump up and around the road, or that they're not cut off from being able to move and to procreate and things like that. So we do a lot of freshwater work. The Duck River is one of the most biodiverse rivers in the world, and that's located in Middle Tennessee. It's a beautiful river. It's got an amazing amount of mussel species. But that's just an example. The area here in Tennessee that we're standing is one of the most biological diverse areas in the planet. And here in Tennessee, we are the most biodiverse inland state in the country. So we don't touch any water, any oceans, but we are most biodiverse inland state. A lot of people don't know that, but we are. And a lot of that's because of our mountains, our creeks, and our streams, and our caves, and the amazing different geographies that we have in our beautiful and very diverse state. I had mentioned climate, so a lot of the work we do, again, is around forestry, so forest management and sequestering carbon, planting trees. We also work with renewable energy and increasing renewable energy in a very smart way, so that we can continue protecting land, but also support the ongoing transition to clean energy away from fossil fuels and a variety of other avenues to mitigate climate change and biodiversity loss, because they are interconnected. And lastly, before I turn it over to Catherine, we would not be able to do our work at the Nature Conservancy if it wasn't for partnerships with local, state, and federal agencies and nonprofit organizations. So we have quite a diverse group of organizations we work with that helps leverage the funding that we receive and also helps escalate at scale and an impact in terms of the work we do. And Catherine's going to talk some about that, because the work we're doing in the apps is significant because of our partnerships with federal agencies and state agencies. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine.
Thanks, Laurel. Thank you all so much for having us today. I really appreciate it. My name is Catherine Medlock. I'm a Knoxville native. Been with the Nature Conservancy for just past the 20-year mark. So it's a great place to work. I love the work that we do and the people that we do it with. We get to work with incredible trustees like Sandy. Yeah, so without further ado, I'm gonna roll on with this with the presentation. This map actually shows in green the areas where the Nature Conservancy works. So we do have a chapter in all 50 states and about 35 countries. And in 2021, we did an assessment, a scientific assessment of the places where we felt like we could make the most impact on those dual crises that Laurel talked about, biodiversity loss and climate change. And you might not be surprised to hear that the Amazon rainforest came up as one of those places where we need to do that conservation work. You might also not be surprised to hear that that was the grasslands of Kenya and the forests of Borneo. But what might surprise you is that the Appalachian mountain chain is one of those places as well. And so what the Nature Conservancy did was we actually we said, we're going to lean in and see if we can't make an appreciable difference in conservation in these 4 places between now and the year 2030. So that gave us 9 years to make an impact in these 4 places. Not an easy task, but one that we felt like that we could achieve. And certainly if we didn't try, you don't try, you don't make it, right? So why the Appalachians? And hopefully this map does a little bit to show you why we chose the Appalachians. This is a model that predicts what we expect to be the range shifts of mammals, birds, and amphibians. So basically all those critters out there, how we expect them to move in the face of climate change. They're gonna be moving north and they're gonna be moving upslope. And you can see that the Appalachian mountain chain kind of like is a corridor. It basically creates a highway for those species to move as our climate changes and shifts. So this was a place where we knew we needed to focus our protection work that Laura was talking about, where we actually purchase property from willing sellers and hopefully turn that into state parks, national parks, that kind of thing. In some cases, we hold it ourselves. And we also needed to ensure that the habitat in those areas was the best that it could possibly be, so that it basically created a good place for those species to move as needed. This is what that footprint looks like on the ground. And you can see here, I've listed out a bunch of superlatives about this region. I'm not gonna read them all to you, but I did want to point out that this is about 9% of the United States. But it actually contains almost 23% of the above ground forest carbon, right? So recognizing that a lot of the rest of the country isn't forested, right? It's grasslands. So if we're going to retain forest carbon in tree stocks, it means we need to do that here in the Appalachians. We brought together, like I said, we have existing programs in all of those 18 states and 3 Canadian provinces. Our job as the Appalachians program was to bring those folks together so that we were all working and kind of rowing in the same direction, right? We're all doing the same thing in these places to achieve our 2030 goals. I'm going to talk a little bit about just a few of the things that we are doing, and especially with kind of a special focus of those places of the types of work that we're doing that touch down here in East Tennessee. Laurel already talked about some of these. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on some of them, recognizing that I know that we got some time restraints, but I'll go into as much detail as time allows. So here is a map with the little dots that show just in the last year, the places, actually I think this is between 2022 and 2023, so it's a little bit older map, but it shows you the kind of work where these are all places where we have done protection. So what that means is the Nature Conservancy has come in, worked with a willing landowner, a willing seller, purchased that property and held it either for us to keep it or to then transport it to either the state or federal government. Why do we act as a middleman, you might ask? It's because our government simply cannot move fast enough, usually for a private landowner who wants to sell their property. So we hold that. The other thing that we often do is we will also, for the realtors in the room, we will basically consolidate. So if there's a piece of property that's got multiple heirs, we have, or deed restrictions, that kind of thing, we can consolidate that and create one property that can then be transferred to the state or federal government. And you can see we've done that all across this mountain chain. We have not done that randomly. We did that in a way of looking at where are the pinch points where we know species are going to be moving, and where we know if we don't protect that now, it creates a break in that chain. Your species will not be able to create that migratory corridor across this 2,000-mile mountain chain. It's important for us to know where those places are, and it's important for us to go to those places and work with the communities to keep those places open to species movement. So for example, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, as you are all familiar with, is clearly a protected corridor. The Cherokee National Forest on either end of it, right? But one of the successes that the Nature Conservancy, the Tennessee chapter did was there was private land in between the Smokies and the Cherokee National Forest on the south portion of the park. And we were able to come in and protect that so that it becomes a continuous corridor of publicly held land and protected in perpetuity. Another thing, the rivers, and this is, Laurel mentioned this, it's something that we have a lot, we're blessed with a lot of wonderful rivers in the southern US, and particularly in Tennessee. Gee, I wish you could see that map a little bit better, but I'm gonna describe it to you. So that top map is the fish diversity in the United States, and you can see how red the Southern Appalachians is. That means we have more species of fish here in those places than anywhere else in the country. In fact, we have more species of fish in the Duck River than pretty much all of Western US combined. Think about that for a minute. Think about that for a minute. Why would you do water conservation anywhere else? So anyway, but then also, if you look at the bottom map, the red there shows the places that are in the watersheds that are imperiled. Okay, the number of fish species that are either federally listed as threatened or endangered or at risk of becoming threatened or endangered. So you can also see that we have a lot of potential impacts to those waterways that we need to address. And then you can see on the left, some of the species that we're talking about, some of the fish, the mussels and crayfish that call our waterways home. And Laurel talked about the culvert replacement work that we do. I want you all to think about habitat for fish the same way you think about your house. So you have different habitats. Your bedroom where you sleep, your kitchen where you eat, your living room where you hang out with your family or watch TV, read, that kind of thing. The culvert on the left-hand side with that drop-off is basically the same as if we put a big wall in your hallway and cut you off so you couldn't get from your bedroom to your kitchen. The fish can't get from one side of that culvert to the other. Mussels, crayfish, they just can't. So they can't get upstream from that. These are not, salmon that can like leap up the rapids. These are little tiny fish and mussels and crayfish that simply can't move across that. And so one of the things that we do is we work to replace but people still need to get across the road, right? Humans, we still need the transportation infrastructure. We want that to be done safely. And so we go in and replace it with what you can see on the bottom there, which is a bottomless culvert that allows fish to be able to get from one side to the other. So it basically means your hallway is now free. You can get from your bedroom to your kitchen now. So this also dramatically decreases the amount of sedimentation that might be going into our waterways, which is one of the major causes of pollution and impacts to our drinking water supply. So this is one of those things that's good for both nature and for people. By the way, if anybody wants to ask questions, we will have hopefully some time for questions, but I think Laurel and I both will be willing to stay afterwards, because I got keep moving. Talk a little bit about our forest work, and for this, we do both resilient forest management. We try to increase prescribed fire and do climate adaptive forestry. And I'm going to talk very specifically about increasing prescribed fire because I'm betting that at least one of you in this room is like, why would you put fire on the ground on purpose? Like, why would you do that? And so I'm going to answer that question to the best of my ability. So our forests, fire is a natural part of our Southern Appalachian forests. It's been here since time immemorial. Our Native Americans used fire. We know it dates back in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. We have charcoal coal records back 10,000 years. We know that fire exists here and occurs here. But if we don't manage that fire, it will occur when we don't want it to. If it's dry and when it's right next to people's houses, that's not what we want. But we know that it's critically important to some species. Some species actually, there's a species of pine tree that will simply not germinate unless it's exposed to fire. So we know that this is an important part of our ecosystem. It's important then for us to put it on the ground when we want it there, when we can do our best to control it, when the conditions are right, when we know that there are safety lines already in existence around that particular piece of property. And so we do that very intentionally, and we do that usually in partnership with Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, Grace Mountains National Park, Cherokee National Forest. And this shows you the number of acres that we burned last year in these different states. I'm going to keep us moving. Just a little bit about the scale that we are trying to achieve here. We are trying, between now and 2030, we hope to protect over 2 million acres in the Appalachians and do at least 30 wildlife passage projects across or underneath major transportation thoroughfares. We hope to do restoration or improved management, like the prescribed fire that I talked about, on over 4 million acres, and we hope to connect over 20,000 miles of river here in the Appalachians. And we it's not just for the critters, that also we hope will be impactful to humans, with over 1 million people that will be less vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, like severe storms like Helene, or wildfires like happened in the Philippines in 2016. We can't stop those things from happening, but we can hope that our environment is more resilient to those things, or as resilient as it possibly can be. So with that, I think, do we have a little time for questions? Just a few questions.
What do you know is being done to manage the deer population?
The question was, what do I know is being done to manage the deer population? So the hunting reg is hunting, and those regulations are set by the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, and they are very careful about using the best science to do that. We could probably talk quite a bit about like chronic wasting disease and some of the other concerns that come from deer overpopulation. Probably more than
to what extent do you depend on federal funding for your activities, since I'm gathering maybe that may not be covered as we go forward?
The question was, to what extent do we depend on federal funding for our activities? It probably depends. It depends on the activity in the state that we're talking about. I think in the U.S., I think we're about 20% federally funded and 80% private funds.
The property control, how accessible are those properties to parent property?
Okay, you tell me if I got that right, if I get the question right. Of the properties that we own and manage, how accessible are they to the public? Is that your question? That's a good question, and it depends on the property. Some of the property that we own and manage was purchased specifically for like a little plant. We can't let people in there because they're gonna walk all over it and kill it, right? So we have to be careful about that. But the majority of our preserves are open to the public. And we try to make those as accessible as we can, as long as they're not damaging the resources that we protected them for.
One more, Holden. What types of species, mainly of animal species, are you seeing migrating across the state as a result of climate change? And I asked this question because I was driving back from Memphis a couple of weeks ago, and the first time I'd ever seen an armadillo in state Tennessee. So what sort of species are we already seeing coming?
That's a great question. Our research shows that all species are going to be migrating because of climate change, even plants, over the long haul. That we will be seeing. That the plant, they're not ants, they can't like get up and walk, but that they will be germinating further. And the armadillos are a great example. Alligators in Tennessee is another great example. Those are things that like you don't expect to see, but are now in some cases permanent residents.
Well, Catherine, thank you for a fantastic presentation. The reach is incredible, what you all do, and the preservation efforts and the conservation efforts are truly remarkable. So all of us appreciate the efforts and from volunteers to the staff that you all lead. You're really making a difference. It's remarkable also to